Okay, so finding the six trig functions, finding alpha and theta, and I know we've already been doing this, but we're going to kind of get a little more elaborate. So this first one, they're going to tell us, let's say the tangent of theta is -1, and the sine of theta is greater than or equal to 0. So the first thing that we want to figure out is we want to figure out what quadrant we're in. So we're still kind of going through that process of figuring out where we're going to be around the unit circle. So it says tangent theta is -1. Well, think about in our little saying, all students think college. So we have to think about where is tangent going to be negative? Well, tangent's going to be negative in the second quadrant, and tangent is going to be negative in the fourth quadrant. Now, the second part of this is telling us that sine is greater than or equal to 0, so sine has to be positive. So what that tells us is that tells us we're going to be in the second quadrant. Now, we also now have to think about if tangent is -1, we know that tangent is opposite over adjacent. So what values in our triangle are going to get us a -1 where it's opposite and adjacent with our special triangles? Well, we know that that's got to be a 45, 45, 90 triangle. So this is going to be -1. This is going to be radical 2. Now, if this is a 45, 45, 90, we think about what is the reference angle going to be, or what's alpha going to be. We know alpha is going to be 45, or just simply pi fourths. We know that theta is going around 90 and then another 45. So basically, we're at 135 or 3 pi fourths. Now we're going to go ahead now and find our 6 trig functions: sine, cosine, tangent we already know is -1, so cotangent is also going to be -1. So sine we know is opposite over hypotenuse. Again, you can go ahead and fill this in. We know this is a 45, 45. So opposite over hypotenuse is going to be 1 over radical 2, which is going to be radical 2 over 2. Cosecant, we know is going to be just simply radical 2. Take the reciprocal, 1 over radical 2. Now, just so you know, we also, you think about, we've just learned our unit circle. You can utilize the cosine, which is adjacent over hypotenuse, but you can also go to your unit circle. Your unit circle, we know that the cosine is going to be x over r. When you're thinking about that. So if you went to your here, it's going to be negative radical 2 over 2 over 1, which is negative radical 2 over 2. And then if we do the secant, it's going to be also negative radical 2. So not to confuse you in bringing in the unit circle, but again, that is another way that you can, once you start to get to know your unit circle, how to figure those values. Okay, let's try another one. Let's say they tell us that the sine of theta is equal to negative 1/2, and cosine theta is let's say less than or equal to 0. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and go through where we would draw the triangle here. Remember, all students think college. We know sine is going to be negative. Well, the only places that sine's negative would be in the third and the fourth quadrant. They're also telling us that cosine is less than or equal to 0, so cosine is negative. So the only place cosine is going to be negative with relation to that is going to be in the third quadrant. So our triangle is going to be drawn here in the third quadrant. We know that sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So with relation to alpha, opposite is going to be the 1, which is going to be negative 1. And the hypotenuse is going to be 2. We know in this relationship in a right triangle, this is going to be a 30, 60, 90. So there's my 30. This is going to be negative radical 3. Again, if I identify alpha, we know is 30 degrees or pi 6. And that would make theta, we go all the way around, that's going to be pi plus another pi 6. So that's going to be 210 degrees or 7 pi 6. Now we're ready to find our different functions. So sine theta we already know is negative 1/2. So cosecant is going to be negative 2. Cosine theta, again, we know cosine is the adjacent over the hypotenuse. So it's going to be negative radical 3 over 2. Secant theta is going to be 2 over negative radical 3, which is what we get? Negative 2 radical 3 over 3. Tangent is the opposite over the adjacent. So that's going to be 1 over radical 3, which is radical 3 over 3. And then the cotangent theta, we know that's just going to be simply radical 3. Okay, so as we take a look at this one, again, I'm going to draw my picture again. Again, all students think college. Now this one is cotangent, so you got to remember, if cotangent theta is radical 3, that means that the tangent theta is going to be 1 over radical 3, which would be radical 3 over 3. Going to be positive, so we want tangent to be positive. We want cosine to be negative. So again, that's going to put us in this third quadrant. Now, as I fill in my values. Cotangent, remember cotangent is going to be, the reciprocal. So when you're filling, thinking about your angle here, tangent's opposite over adjacent. So cotangent is adjacent over opposite. So the adjacent side on this one's going to be radical 3. We know that the opposite side is going to be 1, and then here's going to be our 2. And both of those, again, are negative. If we go through the process here of finding, again, really, if you notice in our picture here, we have drawn the exact same triangle, haven't we? So really our values on this one, alpha is still going to be 30. Theta is still going to be 210 or 7 pi 6. And our 6 values are all going to be the same as example 2. The sine of theta is going to be, again, opposite over hypotenuse, so negative 1/2. Cosecant, still going to be negative 2. Cosine, we already know is negative radical 3 over 2, which makes secant theta 2 over negative radical 3, which again is negative 2 radical 3 over 3. Tangent theta, we already figured over here, which is positive radical 3 over 3. And cotangent is simply radical 3.